without further ado, we give you the New York Times best-selling author and Veronica Roth.
Good morning, Veronica.
Good morning, Rae.
Good morning, Charleston. So, hey, before we get started, there's something that's kind of been on my mind, and I think it might be on other people's minds too. So, I'm just gonna go there. I'm just gonna put it out there. I got the last book of the Divergent trilogy, and I read it, and I was crushed. And I have to know, Veronica, how could you kill the title of detergent? I wanted to see the tide swirl, am I right?
I mean, I just felt like it was the title that was the most honest way of labeling the story. But I'm sorry that it hurt you so deeply.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. That means a lot to me. I read it, and I have to say I liked it in spite of myself, so I forgive you.
Thank you. That means a lot to me.
Well, you're my friend, dude, so. All right, okay.
Now that we've
Thanks,
gotten
I had to get that
out
off
of
my
the way,
chest. So we're going to talk about power dynamics in fiction, gender dynamics in fiction. And there's a question that you and I get asked all the time, and I think this might have come out like the first time we even talked to each other in real life. So I'm just going to ask you straight out, and you can tell everybody, Veronica, why do you write such strong female characters?
Okay, guys, this question drives us both crazy. And the reason is because I feel like it's just as reductive as like the damsel in distress stereotype in certain ways, in that it tells you that a female character, in order to be worthy of your attention and worthy of your sympathy, has to be strong. And usually when we say strong, we mean strong in a physical way. So
like a man, for instance.
Like we want a man to be strong. Same ways. I mean, and we'll talk a little bit about why that in itself is also harmful for men, but we'll talk about that later. But why do I write strong female characters?
Triss.
Yeah.
She's pretty strong.
Yeah, certainly becomes strong in a physical way. Yeah. Although I feel like over the course of the series, it was my goal to make sure that my own definition of strength was expanded. So she abandons physical, violent ways of solving problems and embraces more complicated ones, which was something I was interested in doing. But mostly write about strong female characters because they're interesting characters to me. But I'm gonna turn this back on you. Why do you write strong female characters, Rae?
Well, I think some readers would argue that I don't. I have a character who starts off weak. And I don't know that weak is the right term.
It's not.
We have two different definitions of strength and weakness that we're working with here. One has to do with humanity, personality, the personhood of something, and another definition has to do with the character on the page and is a craft issue. So a strong person in real life is different from a strongly written character on the page. So my character starts off physically weak, but I think she discovers over time that she's actually strong. And her strength, I hope, doesn't come from physicality so much as like brain power. Okay, so if I lived in the world of Divergent, I would totally be erudite. Any other erudite in here? Yeah. So that's my character. She's strong because she's smart and intellectually curious. I hope I've done my job right.
I think so. But
thanks, James.
Yeah. I think we should probably define our terms because we're throwing around this word strong when we mean a strong physically in the way that you have been taught to expect. Also strong, well-written, complex, fully realized character on the page. Strong has narrative agency. those are all different ways that I've seen the word strong used, and it's very strange because I feel like we're talking about completely different things but using the same words, which is never that helpful.
Right.
So I feel like agency is really what I've come to embrace as a kind of strength on the page. It's a character who drives their own story as opposed to being kind of a prop in someone else's story. But I don't know what you think.
Yeah, another way I like to define strength of character, especially when I'm reading, is a character who overcomes something, which means by definition that they experience a moment of weakness or a long moment of weakness. And I think you do this a little in book 2 with Tris. I'm gonna be really vague for all 2 of you who haven't read Insurgent yet. But you know, she's kind of got some PTSD going on, like she's afraid to use a gun, she's feeling guilty for some really hard decision she had to make in the first book. And Suzanne Collins does this too. Any Hunger Games fans? So for all 2 of you who haven't read the second Hunger Games book, there are also moments in there where Katniss is really struggling because of everything that she's gone through. And I think there's even a moment where she goes and like hides in the closet for a while.
That's a Mockingjay, yeah.
Yeah, Mockingjay. So does that mean she's weak?
I don't know.
No.
We don't think so.
No.
I'm hearing no's. I'm hearing a lot of no's. Okay, that's the
Vulnerability
answer I
does
wanted
not
to hear.
equal weakness is what we are.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going with that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So she has to overcome that, just like Tris has to overcome that. And that's what makes good fiction to me, is when a character has an issue, especially an internal, personal issue that might make them make some bad decisions even at first, but then over time they overcome that. To me, that's strength, because anyone can just have no problems.
Right.
That's not strong.
It's impossible.
So, in real life, who is the strongest person that you know?
Okay, let's get sentimental here. My mom, I think.
Yeah.
My mom is the inspiration for Tris's mom, really. That's the only character that I've ever had inspired by a real person. But my mom, throughout my entire life, was just a selfless, very giving person. And sacrificed, everything for us, me and my 2 siblings. But then when I got older and I started hearing about her life story, I realized that she had made a lot of really bold decisions to protect us from certain things that were going on around her. And that she had been, I guess, in a position where she didn't feel like she was respected or that she respected herself. And eventually, so that was kind of like a weak position almost, my mother allowing herself to be that way. But then she took us out of that situation, and she also took herself out of it, which is just like bold, like strong woman. So she's been my model for strength, personally. She has great shoes also. Totally separate issue. How about you? Who's the strongest person you know?
I'd have to say my sister, my little sister. She's 6 years younger than I am. And she got pregnant really young and compounded a bad decision by making another bad decision, which was to marry the father of her child. And he ended up being a drug addict, and I remember getting a call at like 2 in the morning and saying, "Rae, can you come pick me up? I'm leaving my husband. I need to throw my daughter and everything I can fit into your car and come live in your tiny studio apartment for a little while." So we did that. That was fun, but I was so glad to get her out of that situation. Well, since she got married so young, and since she was a mom from a very young age, she didn't have much of an education. And so getting a job as a single mom with no work experience was really challenging for her. And it's been about 10 years now, and that's still really challenging for her. But gradually, over time, she is picking herself up by her bootstraps, and she's plugging forward, and she's raising this child all on her own on a very small amount of income. But she does not give up. She refuses to give up no matter how many times she hears no in a job interview. She just keeps going for it. And she inspires me all the time. I feel like my job is so much easier compared to hers, So the last book of my trilogy is dedicated to her. She was the first person in my life who said, "Yeah, Rae, you can do it. You can be a published author." And she said this coming from her own place of misery and sadness. She still had enough strength to encourage another person, so.
about next.
So speaking of family, one of the reasons we hooked up and started becoming friends is we have some commonalities in our life.
Right.
And one of those is that we're both authors whose books have done okay. Books have done kind of okay. And then, but we're married to men who don't have power careers. And they don't have probably the social power that we do, because they don't do gigs like this, for a living. So does that mean, because the societal norm is that men have to be strong and women are the supporters, does that mean that we can't have a sexy relationship with our husbands? Are we gonna go there? Oh yes, we are.
Kind of like abnegation to the core, so when you're saying the word sexy, I'm like...
Right. I mean romantic.
Romantic is fine.
That's totally what I meant all along.
We just give each other longing looks, that's all we do.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I think it's interesting you bring this up, because to me, the relationship between Elisa and Hector, in your books, hey, spicy. I feel like I have to be really careful talking about this, because it's kind of a spoiler, but are we just gonna let that go?
Yeah, I think for the first book especially, we have to kind of let that go, because yeah. So we'll be as general as possible, but no guarantees on first book at this point, I think.
Yeah, although I'm spoiling the second book, I guess.
I forgive you again.
Okay. But I wanted to talk about this because Elisa is always in a position of power, since she's, a ruler. So any man that she gets involved with, unless he's a fellow ruler, is kind of going to be socially, unbalanced in terms of social power. So I'm wondering if you ever thought about how to handle this dynamic and also the chemistry between them, given that people expect a sexy man to be the powerful man in a in a heterosexual relationship.
I think you meant romantic.
What?
Not sexy. Just kidding.
Romantic.
Oh yeah, no, I did that very much on purpose. Yeah, I think we live in a world where it is not uncommon for the woman in a relationship to have more social, financial power. And I don't think that precludes us from having romantic relationships with really hot guys. So I just wanted to show a power imbalance where the woman was stronger. But that whole social norm, I have to say, it makes me deeply, deeply uncomfortable because it's very heteronormative. Just by nature, it is excluding homosexuals from the conversation, and that makes me deeply uncomfortable. So when we're talking about a power dynamic in a romantic relationship, no matter what it is, that power dynamic has to be negotiated, and both partners have to come to an understanding of their relationship, and that's between them.
Do you think there's always an inherent power imbalance in any relationship?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I think there are objective power imbalances as far as so-and-so makes more money or so-and-so has more social standing. But my husband feels like a 100% partner in all of my endeavors, so it doesn't feel that way.
I'm reading a book in which I feel like this is done really well, so I'm going to talk about it, and maybe you guys someone. So Marie Lu's Legend series. Anyone know? Day, our lovely male, starts off in a position of unequal social power, but that changes throughout the series as he becomes more and more important to the government of his country. But he's kind of governed by his heart. They're like the head and the heart, June and Day, I think. I'm just going to analyze this book for you. And he's ruled by his passions, sort of, but they make him strong, very strong. June is more of a logical thinker. She's got this instant analytical approach to everything that she looks at, and that's wonderfully handled in the text with these parentheticals that are here's my analysis of this is how tall he is, and these are the things that I notice immediately. It's really wonderful, sort of machine-like. And they hold, I think, by the end of the series, sort of equal social power, and that makes their relationship dynamic very interesting. So I think it doesn't have to be imbalanced, even if it's different. And interestingly enough, in that particular relationship, I mean, we think of women as being ruled by passion and the heart, and men as being a little more hard-nosed and logical. But this series kind of reverses that expectation, which is wonderful. So I recommend it. Yeah.
Well, to embarrass somebody else, speaking of reversing gender expectations, I think you do that in the Divergent series quite a lot. And not at first. Like, I'm talking about 4, by the way. Right? I have a creepy old lady crush on him. And if you haven't read it and you want to know why he's named 4, you have to read the book. Look at these signs over here.
I want to multiply with 4.
Now that's romantic. So at first, when Triss is going through this harrowing competition to see if she's going to make it in her new faction, 4 is kind of the guy who's large and in charge. He's doing a lot of training. He's in a position of authority. But that starts to change almost right away as she grows in power and confidence. And as we get to know 4, he's kind of a fluffy bunny. He's a hot, fluffy bunny. Yeah, so did you do that on purpose, or was it just an accident that came out because that's kind of your life paradigm, or how did that work?
I think, I mean, especially in the 3rd book, it became very intentional. Because when I was exploring his voice, I realized that Triss's voice is, well, I chose it because it kind of upended my own expectations of what her gender would make her do, I guess. So she's sort of straightforward, direct, a little repetitive. Like, these are stereotypically masculine characteristics for a voice. And his is a little more, I mean, the differences are slight, but a little more poetic. He doesn't withhold information from the reader in the same way that she does. And so to me, they felt like they were kind of taking each other's, the parts that we've designated for them, kind of culturally with our expectations. And his arc in that book is one of healing and reconciliation, which is, something that we
think of as a feminine arc.
Yeah, like getting back with the family or holding the family together is something that we expect women to do. And Triss's arc is one of self-actualization, of becoming the strongest version of herself and the most fully realized version of herself, which is, in literature, like, because of the examples of literature that we hold up most often, something we think of as like a masculine arc. So I really enjoyed flipping those. As an author, it was kind of what drove me through the story. You always have those things that like fascinate you or interest you, that push you through.
Now, when we talk about feminine arc, masculine arc, we're talking in vast generalities here, and what has been, I think, traditionally accepted.
Right.
But I think there are a lot of books out there right now who are playing with these gender stereotypes, and so I just want to put that out there, that I don't think that's not what we're saying, that that's how it is, or
that these realities definitely exist.
Right.
Yeah. But traditionally, yeah. I have this question. It's been burning inside me for 4 years since I've read your first book, and I'm going to be trying not to be spoilery, just in case. Why didn't it work out with Elisa's first love in a very difficult way? Yeah.
Oh, that.
Yes, that.
Yeah, well, talking about power dynamics, this was a young man. He was really nice. He was very sweet, but he kidnapped her. And so they started to fall in love as she was having a little Stockholm syndrome. Mm-hmm. And I was very uncomfortable with the idea of her ending up with the boy who had abused her in any way. No protagonist of mine will ever end up with somebody like that. Even though he was a sweet guy and I loved him. Yeah. She deserved better.
Yeah, the first time I met Rae was I was signing books I think I was in Columbus, yeah. And she came up into the signing line and was like, "Hi, I'm Rae," and I didn't make the connection. It's like, "Hi, I'm Veronica." And she was like, "No, Rae Carson." I was like, "Oh my God, that's the worst." And I remember being like, "Oh, Rae, like, you broke my heart with first book." book, man, that was a bold move. She was like, well, I didn't think that Elisa deserved to end up with someone out of like Stockholm Syndrome feelings. And it was just like, whoa. I would like to be friends with this Rae Carson because that's the best thing ever.
So, do you think as authors we are obligated to write strong characters?
I'm so glad you asked because no, I don't. I don't think we're obligated. It happens to be that I was fascinated by a character who turned out to be strong, but I love a good, weak character who is complicated. But one of the most important parts of this discussion to me is noting that we shouldn't impose these kinds of restrictions on particularly our female characters. And I wanted to quote from this article I liked.
Oh yes.
Yeah. It was called "I Hate Strong Female Characters," which is slightly like inflammatory and misleading. But she's talking about Sherlock Holmes and how we describe him. And she says, he's a brilliant, solitary, abrasive, bohemian, whimsical, brave, sad, manipulative, neurotic, vain, untidy, fastidious, artistic, courteous, rude, polymath genius. Adding the word strong to that list doesn't seem to me to enhance it very much. And I think that that's kind of wonderful because when we talk about, is the lead female strong? Okay, good, then it's not like an unfeminist. But really, the unfeminist thing is telling women that they have to fit any kind of narrow definition for what they should be. So, I would like to get rid of this word strong and replace it with brave, bold, physically capable,
Afraid,
vulnerable, sad,
overcoming,
in pain,
smart,
awesome,
smart. All these words would be lovely. So that was the thought I had about that question. Now I'm losing track of it.
So sometimes authors then write intentionally weak characters because it's important to the story.
Right.
Like we talked about Suzanne Collins making Katniss kind of weak in the first part of the second book.
And Mrs. Everdeen.
And Mrs. Everdeen, like that is a weak character. She is so in shock over things that have happened and she can't even function. And yet that moves the plot forward and that challenges Katniss to step up and she has to kind of be the parent in the family. So there are times when an author has to write a weak character, and I just mean like emotionally weak or physically weak or something.
I really loved how this is handled in a book called A Long, Long Sleep by Anna Sheehan, which is...
Anyone read that?
Yeah?
Cool.
Mm-hmm. It's a good book, I think, because the character is like, at first you just want to kind of punch her a little bit, because she's like really like, oh heavens, what shall I do? Very kind of like weak feeling and a little passive. And then as the story goes on, you realize that she's passive because she has experienced trauma and she hasn't acknowledged it. So throughout the story, she becomes, once she acknowledges the pain and the trauma in her past, only then is she able to be, she's still like in pain and figuring out who she is, but she becomes a more dynamic character on the page. And I think it's just such a wonderful way of using passivity and apparent weakness to, create this very interesting arc of a character. So, yeah.
Yeah, another one. Has anyone read the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whelan Turner? And I'm not going to spoil, but in the first part of the second book of that series, the main character loses something. He is physically maimed in a way that speaks directly to his identity and what he feels he is good at. And he goes through this like monumental depression, but he picks himself up and he enacts a plan and of course rules the world. And that is awesome. That's a great example. I highly recommend the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whelan Turner.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so speaking of boys.
Boys. We write about them sometimes.
We do sometimes. No, we were talking the other day, we were thinking this whole thing about strong and weak and the traditional definition of strength being damaging to women. Well, I think that's damaging to boys too.
Right.
Like, I think that sets a super unfair expectation. Like, boys, you have to be physically strong, or boys, you have to always be in charge and be, the shoulder that somebody cries on. And I just think that's an unfair expectation. I couldn't stand up to that kind of expectation.
No, I mean, there are some significant people in my family, men, who kind of suffered for this reason because they were sensitive, thoughtful, and maybe weren't all that athletic or physically capable, but were kind of scorned by male parental figures for not being more manly, because I have some, I don't know, it's just a thing, family, we're not going to get into it. I guess we are, but not really. Anyway, and these, my uncle is one of them, and I just think it's so sad that they were made to feel at any moment that they weren't worthy men because they weren't fitting into this masculine ideal. So,
I think we're going to end with just a few book recommendations of books that we feel demonstrate some strong characters, strong in some way, either strong because they pop off the page or strong because they have some qualities that we really admire. And we can't go through all the books we love because we only have 3 minutes left.
Yeah,
so,
if that.
If that. So if we don't mention your book and your author, it's because we just don't have time. One I wanted to talk about was Beauty Queens by Liva Bray. I love that book. It's about beauty pageant contestants who crash on an island, and some of them I loathed in the beginning, and I loathed them because they were loathsome, but as I got to know them, they were wonderful. They were complicated and interesting, and by the end of the book, I was rooting for every single one, so I highly recommend that one.
I would like to recommend the Shadow and Bone series by Lisa. She also has interesting power dynamics and shows how those interesting dynamics can affect a relationship. This is the vaguest thing I've ever said, but just read it, it's good.
Trying not to spoil. I also really love The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily Danford, just because that's a character who, she realizes she's a lesbian as a teenager, and then she's shipped off to a camp to cure her homosexuality, and it's tragic and sad and joyful, and this is a character who really pops off the page. You get to know her in all her idiosyncrasies, and she's very complicated. So to me, that's an example of a strongly written character.
Speaking of books generally that are a little less heteronormative than our books, we have prominent heterosexual relationships in our books, and that's why we've mostly been talking about that. But you should I'm going to plug this panel at 12 with Aaron Hartzler, Bill Konigsberg, David Levithan, and Alex London, who will be talking about less heteronormative things. And Proxy is an example of another sci-fi/fantasy book featuring gay characters. So.
Guys, thank you so much. You were a great audience. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day.